Hello, and welcome to Civility and Solutions, a podcast brought to you by your Court Services section of the Supreme Court of Ohio. I am your host, longtime justice enthusiast, Kate Munger. This is a podcast about inspirational ideas for courts from across our 88 beautiful Ohio counties. The idea of a podcast was conceived as a way to be able to present content that was developed for the 2020 Dispute Resolution Conference. That conference was unfortunately called off for that plan-crushing pandemic called COVID-19. We are happy to be able to use this platform to share solutions and challenges with courts and any listeners who want to stay on the cutting edge of dispute resolution court services issues. The views expressed by guests to this podcast don't necessarily express the views of the Supreme Court. Today's topic relates to transformative mediation. Welcome to Season 1, Episode 3. Our topic is Beyond the Dispute at Hand, using transformative mediation techniques to better understand and resolve conflict. Joining me today through the miracle and wonder of video conferencing is Brandon Lester, Esquire. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me. This is exciting.
Mr. Lester, we have an employer in common. You once worked for the Supreme Court of Ohio as a law clerk for the Honorable Chief Justice Munger.
I did, yeah. It was probably the best experience of my life, my working life, working for Chief Justice Munger. He was just an amazing figure, just a wonderful person to learn from, and you can't beat the court location. It's just a beautiful place to be at work every day. It
is the most beautiful building. You just feel how impressive it is as soon as you walk in the door.
Absolutely.
Well, Chief Justice Munger has legendary status at the Supreme Court, so much that they named the building after him. What do you remember about him from your clerkship?
Oh, there's so much. The one memory that I tell people about every time is my first day there. He said, come into my office. I want to go over some ground rules. I said, okay, great. I'm ready to go. And he said, we treat everyone here with respect. From the custodial staff all the way up to all the justices, we treat everyone with respect. I said, absolutely, got it, absolutely, Chief. And he said, I don't like footnotes. I said, okay. And then he said, I'll probably come up with some more. That should be good for right now. But he was just great. He was so thoughtful and funny and kind to everybody. He was just a model jurist and really, someone that defined the court. And I was just so lucky to clerk with him.
It's really cool. And then you served as the Simon Karras Fellow and Deputy Solicitor in the appeals section of the Ohio Attorney General's Office, where you argued matters before the U.S. Supreme Court and the Supreme Court of Ohio. Wow.
Yeah, well, I argued before the Supreme Court of Ohio. I briefed before the U.S. Supreme Court.
Okay.
But it was exciting. It was a great experience. Ohio's, the Attorney General's office, and especially the solicitor section there, is just an amazing place to cut your teeth. We've had so many great solicitors over time. Doug Cole, Ben Miser, Rich Cordray was the first solicitor. So a lot of, really great minds have come through leading that office. I was just lucky to learn from them.
So what advice would you give to someone who has to argue before the Ohio Supreme Court?
Take a deep breath, and remember that you know more about the case than they do. You've spent a lot of time preparing. You're really the expert in that case, and they're just there to learn from you. So approach it that way. Understand that they're going to be thinking about things maybe for the first or second time, whereas you've been spending months doing it. And I think that builds up a little bit of confidence. Sometimes you get this impression that, that you can't possibly know as much as a judge can on it. You're really there to help them out.
Next, you worked at a little-known law firm called Jones Day, representing employers in various litigation. Your background has some intense litigation. What drew you to mediation?
Yeah. So I, in law school, I studied alternative dispute resolution and got the ADR certificate from the Moritz College of Law, where they have a pretty defined ADR program. And it was something that really spoke to me very early on in my legal career. I've always been someone that likes to problem solve and likes to find ways, to get to the heart of the matter without going through too many, crazy routes to do it. So that's something that I started doing really early on in law school. When it got to, the most common thing that people are going to do in the legal career is they're going to go to a firm and then they're going to start, likely doing some form of litigation. And so I thought that's an area where I can really bring some of these skills to bear. Even at a place like Jones Day, which is, a big litigation firm, is sort of famous for doing a lot of that. I still believe that those principles could be really effective. And so when I started to get into, I was focused on labor and employment law. I got into a lot of like labor arbitrations and single plaintiff types of employment-y types of cases where you have this relationship that is at the heart of what the conflict is all about. And that just jumpstarts the ability of ADR to be able to help whenever you've got those relationships that you can key in on and start to figure out how those are impacting the dispute. Even at a place like Jones Day, you can really use ADR to create benefit.
And now you work at The Ohio State University as Associate General Counsel. What do you like about that job?
Yeah, we have to say the, so, we're distinguishing from an Ohio State University.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Must be clear.
Yeah, that's right. So my job now is I work primarily on faculty-related issues, which can cover the whole realm of things that you might be facing with faculty, from disciplinary issues to contract issues to just general morale sorts of things. And I really like. What drew me to Ohio State is I've always been passionate about education. And so what greater place to be able to further your career where you believe in the mission and the people doing it. But a lot of what I'm able to do on a day-to-day basis is to go and start to sometimes people talk about putting out fires, right? You're going out and you're putting out fires. I like being able to go and put in fire extinguishers before the fires. Right. And so I'm able to talk through, potential issues that may happen and help people figure out things before they bubble up into actual litigation or, to that 4-alarm fire. So it's applying some of these proactive dispute resolution skills that's really quite exciting. And working with faculty, they're, some of the most intelligent people that you're ever going to meet. So you're always going to be on your toes working with them. They're going to keep you honest and challenge you on things. So that's exciting. It's a fun place to be.
All right. So you are all set to present about transformative mediation at the Dispute Resolution Conference. And are you ready to try that topic on this new platform today?
Sure. Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
All right. Let's get started.
All right.
So transformative mediation techniques differ from traditional facilitative or evaluative tools. Can you give our listeners a little background on the topic of transformative mediation?
Yeah. And it's not something, if you've studied ADR in law school or elsewhere, you've probably learned a lot about facilitative, maybe a little bit about evaluative mediation. And facilitative is sort of the primary way that it's taught. If you're like me, you didn't learn much of anything about transformative mediation. Even taking, a number of classes in law school on it, it wasn't something that really came up. And it's not something that I really got to actually until I went to Jones Day. And what got me interested in the topic is as I said just a few minutes ago, I was doing labor arbitrations, and I would go up to New Jersey and do labor arbitration. So it's, it's a tough place. It's sort of a tough cutting ground. And I would see these disputes that are coming up that to me didn't make a lot of sense. They were disputes over very little sorts of things. That, to an outsider coming in started to seem a little bit silly. It would be, grieving this, very tiny little thing here, this very little tiny thing here. And, bringing my conflict resolution, hat to bear, I would say, well, look, we can easily solve this. This is, a little bit of money here, a little bit, this sort of thing. But I kept seeing them over and over and over again in the same areas, just the same silly little disputes just kept happening. And I started to ask myself, well, why is this happening? Why do we keep having this system where people keep challenging these sorts of things? Transformative mediation is something I started to look at because the underlying theory is that conflict isn't necessarily bad, right? I mean, we have conflict all the time and it helps us grow and those sorts of things. But it's often underlying the surface and it's getting to issues that aren't necessarily the ones that the parties are fighting about. And so when you start to look at conflict at that level and really getting down to the root of it, you find a lot of times what it's dealing with are not the things that you're fighting about at all. It's about some lack of communication or some lack of respect or something like that that is really driving people to be in conflict about things that seemingly don't have any relationship to it. So that's what got me interested. I started looking at it and I started bringing what I would call a transformative arbitration approach. I started bringing some of these skills to bear and started trying to find ways that we would have discussions before the arbitration started. And I would ask the arbitrator, hey, can we just sort of facilitate a discussion about this? And it wouldn't be, okay, you've grieved this particular tiny issue. Let's talk about that particular tiny issue. It would be, what's bothering you? What's going on here? We would get into these really deep conversations about, some underlying issue. And we'd start to find that the reason that we were there for would get resolved and other issues would get resolved at the same time. So that's what got me interested in it. That's what I started to probe a little bit. And the more I read about it, the more, it seemed like some of these skills can be brought to bear in a traditional mediation as well.
So when they say transformative, what's being transformed?
Yeah, it's really the nature of how the parties are dealing with their conflict. And we can get to this maybe as we go a little bit further in here. But two of the primary things that you are trying to achieve is shifts in recognition. That is, what people understand what the issues are, what their issue is, what the other party's issue is. And then empowerment, that they are empowered to resolve that. So it's not necessarily a mediator comes in and solves everything for them, that they are able to get to the root of that conflict and start to work with the other side.
And what's the mediator's role in a transformative mediation?
Right. So, I think a lot of us that have studied facilitative mediation, you know that you're not supposed to be overwhelming the mediation. You're not supposed to be coming in and doing all of the talking and that sort of thing. But we've all been in mediations where mediators are controlling the mediation, right? They come in and they say, okay, I've read your position statements. What we're here to talk about today is this. I want to hear what your thoughts are on this particular piece of it. I want to hear what your thoughts on this particular piece of it are. Okay, now we're going to break up into separate rooms. You're never going to see each other again for the rest of the day. And then I'm going to go back and forth and I'm going to try and figure out how we get to a settlement here. And if we get to a settlement, great. And if we don't get to a settlement, okay, we tried. And it's not, that's not bad faith or anything. I mean, that's them trying to settle it. But it's not it's not letting the parties get to the root of the thing together, right? It's not letting them talk about necessarily what's important to them. It's the mediator setting the broader agenda, the mediator saying, we're here to try to work towards settlement. In a transformative mediation, what the mediator is doing is letting the parties talk about, okay, what's important to me here? What is driving me here today? And what they bring up may not be the 4 or 5 issues that came up in that, in the complaint. It may be something else. Let's take, for example, somebody, let's say a female employee sues under the Fair Pay Act and says, I feel like I've been paid less than my male counterparts. I've got a variety of things where I thought I did this. And you get into the mediation and the mediator says, what do you want to talk about? And the employee says, it all started when I asked to go on bereavement leave several years ago. And it was for my cousin. And your policy was it was only immediate family. And ever since then, I felt like you didn't care about me. And now and now when I look at it, I feel like I'm not being paid fairly and I feel like I'm not respected. I mean, all of those issues can start to bubble up. And so what's really driving at the lawsuit at that point? I mean, maybe it is a pay issue. Maybe there are some pay discrepancies. But what we have is communication and respect. Those things are being lost. And if you just focus on, okay, well, what evidence do you have to support your pay differential? Okay, now go in your other room and don't talk about it. Talk to me about it. Don't talk to them about it. Are you going to get those shifts? right? So that's what I think transformative mediation is trying to get at, is using that ability to let the parties talk to each other, sort of stepping back a bit, let them be the agenda setters and let them share their thoughts about it, to help drive to a better understanding of the conflict and hopefully resolution. I mean, the goal of all this is to hopefully, get to a point where they're in a better place, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the pure settlement on the exact same issue that you thought was going to be there.
And I love that example with the employment situation. And you had another example too that we talked about, and it was an Italian restaurant. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah. So I'll give you a couple lines here, right? So we'll do a little, for those of us that did community theater back in the day, right?
Oh, I've been preparing for this my whole life. Can't wait.
Great. Okay. So I don't have any cue cards here, but I'll give you 2 lines. So your lines will be, where do you want to go to dinner? And then the Italian. How about the Italian place?
Okay.
I'll do a line in between each of those. Okay. So you start.
Where do you want to go to dinner?
I don't know. Where do you want to go?
How about the Italian place?
Fine. Right? Okay. So now you may feel the tension. It's palpable here, right?
I feel like you didn't want to go to the Italian place. What's wrong with the Italian place?
That's right. So,
you shoot down every suggestion I have. Why don't you come up with something? Sorry, you gave me a prompt. Now I'm running with it.
That's right. So, there's a dispute that's coming here, right? And if we went 4 or 5 lines down further, it's going to be a big fight, right? And we've all been in that sort of fight. Now, if we were to insert a mediator, it's unlikely that you're hiring a mediator for this, but if we were to insert a mediator, they may say, well, where did you go out to dinner last week, right? Okay, you went to the Italian place last week. Well, how about, we go to the Chinese place this week, or the Mexican, whatever it is, right? There are a lot of ways that a mediator could come talk them through that specific dispute. But is that dispute going to continue to happen? There is something there, right? Hopefully, there is something there that really at the heart of a problem that those people are going to be having to deal with. And the longer we set that aside, the longer we sort of deal with the surface level things, we're going to continue to have issues there. So I think what we really need to ask ourselves is mediation or some other form of ADR really doing what we want it to do? Is it leading the parties to get to a result of what we hope that it's trying to solve? And I would suggest that sometimes a focus on the precise issue that is being presented and a focus on the precise settlement of that issue may not be the best thing for the parties.
2 terms that come up in transformative mediation are recognition and empowerment. Can you explain what those are?
Right. So, recognition is you start to understand your views, and you start to understand the views of the other side, right? And it's not just the position of your position or the position of the other side. Anybody that's had sort of that basic, position versus interests, right? My position is I want the famous example is my position is I want the orange, and the other person's position is they want the orange, and one person wants it to bake a cake with, and the other one wants the juice or something like that, right? The position is what you're explaining that you want. The interest is why you want it, but I'm saying even go a layer below that is understanding how you're getting at those things, why you have those feelings to begin with. So it's both understanding where you're coming from and where the other side's coming from. In the example I gave of the fair pay thing, understanding that the reason this person feels so disrespected is because it felt like their family didn't matter to them when they were denied bereavement leave, right? Empowerment is where they really feel like they have the strength or the ability to resolve a particular situation. Maybe they feel, in that situation, maybe the person felt like they couldn't stand up because it's their boss, and they couldn't express their feelings about it because they thought that maybe they'd be retaliated against, or that there would be something that would prevent them from doing it. Empowerment says, you can stand up, you can explain this, and it goes both ways. I mean, as someone who's represented employers most of their career, we sometimes think of corporations or employers as being these, bloodless, heartless, of institutions, but they're made up of people too. And they have feelings about this. And so your direct supervisor has, thoughts about it. Maybe they feel like they haven't done a good job because their team member is feeling disrespected. And so there's some emotions tied up in that. So that's the basis of those two things. How you get to those is not, you go into room A and you go into room B and never talk about it. The way you get to those is starting to have a conversation with each other about those things.
So some lawyers like to be the boss of things and always be in control. What kind of advice would you have for an in-control kind of person who wants to try transformative mediation?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think it's natural. I tend to be a bit of a control freak too. I want to.
Gonna own it, huh?
That's right. And so you have to take a step back and you have to say, it's not about me here, right? It's not about me. I am here to help them. And if I am telling them what to do, I'm not helping them, right? If I'm saying this is what you have to feel, this is how you, and mediators aren't necessarily coming in and saying this is exactly what you have to do. But if you're setting the agenda, if you're saying these are the topics that I want to talk about today versus the topics that you want to talk about today, you're serving your own interests, not theirs. So take a step back. Think, what is it that they want to talk about? What is it? They know that they're here for this dispute. And the fact that they are bringing these things up suggests that it's important to them somehow. So how are they going to get to that? It's tough, right? You just have to, all right, I'm going to let them talk. I'm going to sit back a little bit. It doesn't mean that you do nothing. It doesn't mean that you're powerless to help them or that you're just there to be an adult in case people start throwing chairs or something like that, right? It's sort of recognizing that maybe you come in and with little bits here and there to help guide it. To help get to a productive place. But you have to be a bit more restrained than I think some people have tended to be in studying mediation.
Just to facilitate that free-flowing conversation.
Right.
To get, as you said, to the heart of what's really the problem at the mediation.
That's right. And, a lot of time, I mean, again, we've all been in mediations where the mediator says, okay, here are the issues, here are the ground rules, here are the issues that are before us here today. I would suggest one technique is to say, okay, what are the issues that are important to you, right? What are the things that are important to you that we discussed today? And let that be a running list throughout the mediation. Okay, now you've raised this other thing, right? So let's talk about that. Explain to me why this is important. Explain to all of us. And the other thing, and I sort of alluded to all this, is doing it together, right? to be in the room together. That's a scary proposition. And it doesn't always work, especially if you don't have a relationship, right? If it's random person A whose car hit random person B and they've never met each other before, they're never going to see each other again, there's probably not going to be a lot of that underlying stuff there. But if you've got someone that's worked for a company for 15 years and their boss is there and they know each other quite well, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to unpack. And it's tough to unpack that if you don't see each other.
So what are some other tips for using this mediation style?
One thing is the great fear of mediators is it's going to get out of hand. Right? That people are going to start insulting each other, that they're going to get, maybe yelling and screaming, and it's going to get really uncomfortable, and you're not going to be able to control it. I've been in mediations where that has happened, right? I think being at peace with the fact that it may get a little heated is something that's really important, because when people get a little heated, I mean, you can't have them throwing chairs at each other, and you can't have them, threatening violence or whatever. But, if somebody says, well, I feel like this is racist, or I feel like this is sexist, right? There are some people that would say, okay, look, we're not going to insult each other. We're not going to do that sort of thing. But it may be their actual feeling. And if they don't get to it, it's going to stay there, right? And the other side is not going to understand why they feel it's racist or sexist. They're not going to be empowered to respond to it. So letting really heated emotions come out, letting parties express themselves even when it's uncomfortable, and letting voices get a little loud sometimes. Sometimes people are going to get agitated in these things. Sometimes they're going to feel offended. Letting that start to come out so people can talk about it is a way to get through those things. So don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid to let emotions run a little high. Don't be afraid to let people express themselves in ways that may not be conducive to everybody wanting to sit around the table all day, right? Sometimes that's
cathartic. Yeah,
that's right. It's absolutely out. That's right. So I've been in too many mediations where the first hint of that is, all right, let's cool off. Let's go to a separate room. Let's not worry about that. Let's get back to the task at hand. Now, I know you brought that up, but really what we're here for today is you indicated that you want to be paid a little bit better, right? Those things are going to continue until you get to them.
So explain, there's a technique called reflection. Is that right? Can you explain how that works?
Right. So it's similar if you've heard the term looping. And a lot of these things are similar to facilitative types of techniques that you may use, but it's with a little bit of a different mindset. So reflection is you're letting the parties say what they want to say, and then you're reflecting back what they said. Right. So, looping is you're coming in and they're saying this, and you say, okay, I hear you said this. Is that right? In reflection, a lot of times you're reflecting both what they shared and the emotions with which they shared it. So, you're indicating that, you feel like you're not being paid appropriately, and then you feel like you're ultimately, this is all stemming from a lack of respect. And the way that you showed that lack of respect, or the way that lack of respect came up originally, was because you weren't allowed to use bereavement leave to go to your cousin's funeral. And you're saying that made you angry, right? And you're saying that you felt belittled. And maybe they didn't use those exact words, but those are the emotions that they're sharing. So you're helping to bring some of both the actual content of what they're saying and the emotions that they're expressing there. What you don't want to do is, use words that they wouldn't use. If they say, oh, no, that's not at all what I'm, okay, maybe I misunderstood. Well, how would you describe it? Or how would you express your feelings, or those sorts of things? So you want to be able to do that, but you're really helping to draw out and give some names to both what they're saying and what they're feeling.
Now, summarizing is a technique that a lot of mediators use. What do you think are some effective ways to use summarizing? Right.
And so again, summarizing is something that people do. What I've found mediators do is they will take, they'll pull out the important points, or what they see as the important points, right? So this person will go on a 5-minute rant about something, and they'll say, okay, well, what I heard you saying is, looping it back to the pay thing. I heard you talking about this thing about your pay, and they talked about something else for 4 minutes. Right? So summarize everything that they said, and let that sort of, let them feel heard in that way, right? Being heard is a really important thing. If you sort of spilled your heart to someone and they said, okay, so I heard that you didn't want to be late, for work one day.
I heard the bottom line, getting through all the other stuff you were talking about was this. Yeah, that's right. Defeats that purpose.
That's right. So it's helping people be heard. And again, a lot of this is pulling this up to the surface, getting it out there, getting all of these things out there. And maybe after the first time you've done it, the parties decide, okay, this isn't really relevant. And if they decide it's not really relevant, then great, you can move on and you don't have to worry about it. But again, this goes to that ceding control back to them, letting them decide, okay, this is not important to me, or this is important to me, even if it doesn't feel important to you as the mediator.
Okay, one more technique that I know you would mention is translation. How is that used?
Sometimes people have trouble expressing themselves, right? No big surprise there, especially when emotions run high. And so there are going to be times where people can't quite come up with the word for what they're trying to say. They're trying to express themselves, but they're just not able to say it. You can translate a little bit. You can step in and say, it sounds to me like what you're saying is that you were really, and I'm going to use a common word, right? But you were really frustrated at this, or, you were really feeling, put down by this or whatever. And they go, yes, right? Yes, that's it. That's what I was feeling, right? And so you can do some of that. But again, you don't want to impose yourself on them. You don't want them to say, that's not at all what I was feeling. Well, that's what it sounded like to me. All right, we're going to move on, right? You want to let them do corrections, but don't be afraid, to step in, to say back what they're trying to say, to summarize everything they're saying, and then to translate it into a way that maybe is a little bit more accessible or maybe gets to the heart of it a little bit more while still respecting that level of party self-determination.
Okay. And are there any other tips that you want to get out there about transformative mediation, empowering these parties?
Yeah.
What works?
So another thing that that sometimes people are uncomfortable with is silence, right? And we see this in a lot of different contexts. Depositions, if you're taking a deposition, people are really uncomfortable with silence. And so if an attorney just stops talking, the witness a lot of times will just keep talking, right? So it's good if you're taking a deposition, right? In a mediation, sometimes people are uncomfortable with it. Somebody said something, and then there's this urge to just jump right in and, okay, well, you've said this. Let me talk about all these things, right? Don't be afraid to let silence sit. Sometimes people need a moment. They've got to think through it. There's something that maybe they didn't realize that's the way they were being perceived. Going back to that fair pay example, maybe the manager says, I had no idea, I never thought about it. I thought about it. I know our policies. I just, you were a new employee. I just said, this is what our policy. I thought you were just asking about it. I had no idea this person was so important to you. And now I feel terrible that you couldn't go to a funeral of someone that was so important to you. I would have never done that. And I feel terrible now, right? But maybe they were so caught up in, well, this was what the policy was. I told you what the policy is, right? And until you have that opportunity to sit back and think, oh my gosh, right? People don't generally want to be the bad guy, right? There are some people that do, but generally speaking, people don't want to be the bad guy. They don't want to be perceived as the bad guy. And sometimes they don't realize that they're being perceived as the bad guy. So how do you have that conversation in a way that maybe they start to realize, oh no, I was the bad guy here, and I'm not comfortable with that. And how does that then lead to a resolution? So, letting silence sit, letting people think through some of that is really important. Again, just sort of staying back, sort of being a supportive presence, a calming presence, using, sort of your really, helpful listening techniques, encouraging techniques. It's a lot harder on Zoom. If you where you're kind of like looking at the you're not sure where people are looking and those sorts of things, but you're really looking at them, nodding your head, writing down, being attentive to what the other side is saying. Going through all of those things will really help them feel heard, feel comfortable being heard, and be able to express that.
And especially when you're not quashing the conflict becoming up. Yeah.
That's right. Well, and that's the other thing is, helping people, helping the party that is hearing themselves being talked about, right? Hearing themselves be described in a way that may make them uncomfortable. How do you create an environment where they don't just storm out of the room, right? I mean, that's part of the skill of this, is letting people know, hey, look, this, as I read through this and as I'm hearing you talking, it sounds like there are going to be some issues that are going to be coming up here that may make people uncomfortable. I want you to know that I'm going to encourage you all to talk about these things. I don't think it will be easy. I don't think you're going to be comfortable about it. And so I want you to have an honest dialogue. I want you to be able to respond to each other. Let's do it in a productive way, but that may involve high emotions. It may involve things that don't make you uncomfortable. I'm here to sort of help you talk about it, but I'm not here to tell you that's invalid, that you shouldn't feel that way, that it's horrible that they called you that. I'm not going to do it because I don't know. So it's sort of being that supportive presence without being the over the top, I'm going to be in charge of this situation presence.
So what happens if you don't get a settlement? Did you fail as a mediator?
Yeah. Right. So, we're a really settlement driven culture, right? We have, like the courts will have settlement weeks, or we'll have this idea that you have to get a settlement. A lot of mediations don't end in settlement. Right? There's a lot of mediators that come in and they just don't end in settlement one way or the other. I have been in a number of mediations where we didn't get to a settlement, but we made good progress, right? We've gotten along the way, and maybe there will be a settlement down there. I would think of this, if it doesn't result in a settlement, as good progress, right? Even if it doesn't advance the legal issue, if it advances the personal issue, if it advances the understanding of that's putting the parties along the way to potentially resolving it. So it's, I never consider a mediation a failure if you don't get to a settlement. Sometimes people are too far apart. Sometimes there are issues that are just going to be irreconcilable, and the court's going to have to get to them. But if you can make good progress, whether it's progress on those issues or progress on the relationships underneath it, I think it's a success.
And if you're focusing on these relationships and maybe keeping them out of court at all the next time, is a big focus on settlement, can it be a problem in this type of mediation?
Well, if you are not getting to the heart of this and you start to have these things come up over and over and over again, you're just going to be overwhelming the courts with it, right? And if it's a one-off, if it's the people that have never met each other, they're unlikely to have, those sorts of recurring things. But like I said, my world is labor and employment. With labor, you are stuck with those people, right?
They're yours,
family, right? For a long period of time. And so if you don't get to the root of that, you're going to keep seeing those issues. Same with employment. Even if it's a situation where someone has left, the feelings, they're still a member of that community, and they may be bad-mouthing you to everybody in the community. So you're heartless, you're whatever, right? If you can't get to that,
slamming you on Yelp, making sure nobody wants to work for you again. Yeah.
That's right.
What are some challenges that face mediators that might surprise listeners who don't work in this area?
Yeah, I think getting parties to be comfortable with it is going to be tough, right? Especially if you have sophisticated litigators on the other side. There are, on each side, that are used to ADR looking and feeling a particular way. They're talking to their clients. Okay, this is what mediation is going to look like. The mediator's got to come in, lay out the ground rules, and then everybody's going to go to their other rooms, and we'll sit there for 12 hours, and we'll get along. That sort of thing. Getting buy-in from them, you may get some resistance. So I think that's going to be because shuttle mediation and that sort of style has really become so ingrained. I think that might be a bit of a difficulty. You also, there are a lot of people that work in this field, and I would encourage you to read The Promise of Mediation by Barrett Bush and Folger is a really good book on this. But there are some of the people in this field who say, if you're going to do this, you have to go all in on this, right? You have to do a full. It is only a transformative mediation, and so you have to let everybody know ahead of time that this is exactly what we're doing and that sort of thing. I tend to be of the belief that some of these skills can be brought to bear even in a traditional type of thing, that you can start to use some of these techniques in a productive way. But what you can't do is have a bit of a schizophrenic style where you're jumping from, okay, I want to hear everything that you say, to, okay, now I don't care about that. Let's get down to brass tacks. So you have to be really careful about those sorts of things. And just given how people feel about it, but again, I think they can still be successful.
Great. So, do you see any trends in mediation now that might be developing, maybe with the pandemic or just overall?
Yeah, So, again, I'm being a practitioner. I'm not mediating every day, so I can't get into exactly what it looks like. But the few mediations that I have done since this all started have been a lot less personal, and been frankly a lot less productive than they were pre-pandemic. I've always believed that there's a lot of power in having people there to talk through things. And so as you move to technology, I think you have to find ways to get around the impersonal screen, right? You can't really see the people, especially if there's 15 people on the screen, you can't see what everybody's doing. You can't really get to those sorts of things. I think that's going to be a big difficulty that mediators are going to have to work through, so that you can still get that personal level of attention and helping the parties feel comfortable sharing things, even if they're in their basements, talking to a screen.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Mr. Lester, you've talked about transformative mediation and lots of different tips and skills for transformative mediation and why it works and how it works. So we're coming towards the end of our podcast. You've made it. Yay.
Right. So, I expect confetti or something.
There should be confetti. I'll get some. But here's a bit I'd like to do at the end of every podcast, and it's called 2 for me and 1 for you. So there's going to be 2 questions for you as a presenter and 1 question that you will be able to ask our audience as a kind of pop quiz to see if they've been paying attention today.
Sounds good.
So the first question for you is, what's an interesting mediation-related story you can tell?
Yeah, so I'm not sure that this is the best example of a mediator doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. But a really memorable, so as I mentioned, when I was doing some of these things back at the law firm, and we'd have some of these silly disputes that were coming up that were driving me to think about, why are we getting these things? The most memorable one is we were there to arbitrate, and the arbitrator said, well, I'm going to try to talk this through and try to mediate this a little bit to see, what we get into before we do it. And so he asked us as the employer to sort of lay out our side, and then he asked the union to lay out their side. And after that, he turned to them, and the only thing he said was, "Really?" and everybody just went quiet. And we went into separate rooms, and about 2 hours later, they said, "We're just dropping this."
Oh my God.
So I'm not sure that that's like the best example of mediator ethics. But it was a fairly ridiculous situation.
Oh my gosh.
Never forget that. Really?
That's what you're coming with today? Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay, question 2. Who is an amazing person who's related to the mediation field, and why do you appreciate them?
Yeah, so this is, I'm going to feel a little bit like a teacher's pet in doing this. But so I got my certificate in ADR from the Moritz College of Law, and I was really lucky to work with. They have a great faculty with a lot of people, a lot of expertise there, and being associated with the Ohio State University, I always have to to give them kudos. But it's one thing to sort of be someone who is become an expert in this field, and then it's another thing to watch them continue to be a really powerful force in the field. So I want to highlight a couple people, Nancy Rogers, who everybody should know, and Josh Stolberg, and people like Bill Froelich, who's a younger person that they have over there. They've started working on this thing called the Divided Communities Project, which if you are not familiar with this, I would highly encourage you to look it up. You can Google it, just the Divided Community Project. And what they're really doing is applying a lot of these dispute resolution techniques to cities in conflict, right? So, Ferguson after the Michael Brown thing, or, Kenosha that, we're seeing now, any of these things where you start to see a community that's become divided for one issue or another. And they're sending people to these places to start, finding ways to work through conflict. It is an amazing idea. It's something that is needed now more than ever. They've developed a lot of toolkits for communities that are starting to do this with tips and tricks on how to build your community up, some proactive steps that you can take before you...
Fire extinguishers.
Putting those fire extinguishers in. Absolutely. So, all those things that you can do. It is an amazing resource. I would encourage everybody to go look at it. Even if you're not part of an organizational community or something like that, they're just amazing things to think through. So I really want to highlight the work that they've done there and encourage people to go take a look at it.
Thank you. That's great. All right. Now it's your chance to give our audience a knowledge check. What's a pop quiz question that they should be able to answer after listening to this podcast?
Right. So what are the two most important things that transformative mediators are trying to encourage in the people in those things? What are the two things that they're trying to achieve? And hopefully people are listening at the two big things that they're trying to facilitate here.
All right. If not, they can just go back and listen to it again.
That's right.
Got to get your information. Well, thank you so much, Brandon Lester, for being here today on our podcast. Do you have any closing remarks that you wanted to make before I sign it off today?
Oh, well, thank you so much for doing this. It was really disappointing. I wish we could have been there in person to do this, and I was really looking forward to the conference. But this is great. It's fun. I've never done a podcast before. It makes me feel a bit like a celebrity here. As I said, if I'm in my basement.
Mediation celebrity.
That's right. So this is great. So thanks so much. I encourage you guys to continue to do this stuff.
Great. Thank you. And thank you to all of our listeners today and to everyone who works in the field of justice. All right. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.